Well, good evening to all our viewers. Welcome to the 7th episode of the Alberta First Pension Plan online town hall. Every second week, we present and discuss the benefits of an Alberta pension plan. My name is Kerry Lambert, host of The Chris and Kerry Show, and I'll be your host for this evening's town hall. Alberta's First Pension Plan is a grassroots initiative of concerned Albertans who want to educate all Albertans on the benefits of an Alberta pension plan. Our goal is to collect 270,000 names and contact information, and once that is done, we will begin to collect signatures within a 90-day window and present it to our Alberta provincial government and initiate a referendum on an Alberta pension plan. And then you, Albertans, get to choose whether you want an Alberta pension plan or not. We are not affiliated with any political party or lobbyist group. We rely on donations and volunteers to get our message of an Alberta pension plan out to everyone. Please consider volunteering and donating, and you can go to our website to find out more. And that is at albertafirstpension.ca, as well as you can also send us an email at info@albertafirstpension.ca. Tonight's topic, I'm just going to get rid of that for a second. Tonight's topic is we want to do 10 of these shows. So this is the 7th episode. So we've got tonight when we've got 3 more after this. We have some really burning questions, but this one, I just want to be able to answer comments and questions from social media. And where is our social media? Well, we are on, I'm going to try and quickly find that here. There we are. We are on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we're on X, we're on YouTube, we're on Rumble, and I'm sure we're around various other spots, especially when we rebroadcast this on the Chris and Kerry Show. And I know our resident pension expert who will be on right away, Tanner Hnidey, also posts some stuff on his own social media feeds. And so I'm sure we'll be going through a lot of those questions as well. This is a live town hall, so we encourage you to ask questions and make comments throughout the presentation. Just put 3 questions before your questions, so it'll be flagged. And if you can, please share. And now I will bring on Tanner. How are you, Tanner?
Not bad. How are you? Today was a big day for us, for
yes.
Paige and I, because we got a TV today. And so we're really flying. We're really decorating.
You got a TV, and I just canceled my my Shaw TV a couple of weeks ago.
Well, we use it for. Well, you don't really watch the news, to be honest.
No,
it might, right. It might not come as much of a surprise, but a sports match here or there, golf and so on, to watch while we're making supper.
Oh yeah,
one of those things, or maybe a movie on a Friday night, something like that.
That's right. And yeah, for the most part, I just I use the like what everybody else seems to be on Netflix and Amazon Prime and whatever. And likewise, I do restream. I watch a lot of these videos on YouTube and Rumble, and that seems to be the other thing. When I'm driving around the province, I actually just got back from stuff in Winnipeg and listening to podcasts on the way back. It's a great way to kill 13 or 15 hours on a drive back from Manitoba. So I'm hoping that we can keep this episode into about an hour. I know Tanner is now taking on another job where, what are you doing now? You're teaching?
Yeah, that's right. Just at the college, I teach English. It's a couple months with Paige in school and so on. She does it online. And so it means that she's often busy in the evenings. And I thought, that's right. Why not? Usually I'm here.
Great. We will be changing our schedule. Instead of being at 7 o'clock for the remainders, we're going to be changing it to Tuesday at 5 p.m. Just synchronize your swatch and we'll figure it all out. So, but again, these are rebroadcast all the way through, and you can always ask questions and we go back through and look at these questions. So having said all that, I'm going to go back through, and there are many reoccurring questions, and those are the ones that I want to talk about first. I was going to say get rid of, but we definitely need to talk about those first. And so I'm going to come up with this one first because give me a second. I actually thought I'd be able to just do this. I am going to copy and paste these questions and then put them into the comments. That way you guys can see exactly what's happening. And then that way I have a quick way of doing this. Where does the number 270,000 come from? And of course, that is the number that we're telling people that we need the contact information and essentially the signatures of 270,000 people so that we can present that list of signature or those actual wet signatures to our premier or to, I guess, someone that would represent as a citizens initiative, right? And then be able to say we have a large majority of voters in Alberta that want to be able to do this. So I could probably get Tanner to talk a little bit more about this, but I did want to show you something too, because I had to actually look this up today, because all the way through this, we've been talking about 10%. We need 10% for certain things. We need, I think it's 20% for other things. So if you go to the actual Elections Alberta website, number of signatures required for an initiative, citizens initiative for a legislative or policy proposal, and I'm going to zoom this up here. We are now at, this is the number of eligible voters that we have. So almost 3 million out of the 2024 number is 4.8 or 4.9 million people in Alberta. So we have about 3 million that are eligible for voting, which means that if we use 10% of that, we have almost 300,000 signatures that we actually need. So that was a bit of a revelation when we were going through these. So I'm so glad people do ask these questions. So here we've been talking about 270,000 all the way through. And yet now, I think as a good comfort zone, we would need 300,000. Do you want to make any comment on that? I mean, it's just a simple math problem. But.
Yeah, no, I don't really need to. I think you've laid it out nicely. There is a rule that says you have to have 10% of the electorate signing a petition to hold a referendum, or at least to demand a referendum. And as Alberta's population continually increases, it doesn't decrease, it increases.
Last year, we had 200,000 more migrants into Alberta.
Right. So that's a huge change, right? That is a massive calculus to take into account.
Yeah.
And so as that changes, so too the requirements change, and they're dynamic. They're changing often. And you have to, adapt to it.
Yeah. No, I agree. So great question. And so now we actually know the answers, and now that leaves me more work to do in terms of changing the website and changing any of the stuff that we've been posting. But 270,000 is still relevant, right? If we're looking at that, then that is still a good number to be definitely aiming for. To whether or not they would get to the nitty gritties and say, well, you need 300, but you only got 299. I'm not sure whether or not that, I don't know. Right. So, and of course, the next question is riding on the coattails of that. It's not going to show it, but the question is, how many signatures do we have right now? We do have about 10% of that number. We do have over 30,000 contact names and information. So we are on our way. Obviously, it's not going as fast as we could, which is why we need help from our viewers to help spread this message. Share if you can, and don't forget to, when nobody likes to talk politics. I just got back from a family event in Manitoba, and yeah, it's interesting that nobody likes to talk about politics, especially there they didn't really care about Alberta politics. But if you're in Alberta, don't be afraid to bring this up at the dinner table. Thanksgiving is going to be upon us pretty quick. Don't be afraid of that, right? I think that's another thing that I would like to mention, that people should be talking about this, because it affects everybody, and it doesn't matter which side of the political spectrum you're on, where you are, and religion, what color you are, anything like that. This is money. This is what's your nest egg, or part of your nest egg for when you retire, your pension, and everyone should have some say in how that money is going to be invested and where it's going to come from. So I think that does that make sense?
That makes total sense.
So let me just see. I'm not sure why that didn't post, but it'd be easier if it did. And if it doesn't, I'm just going to try one more quick little thing on here, and I'm just going to post it to this one here. No, that is not going to work. So I'm just going to do this instead. This will probably work 90% of the time. So here we go. Rick Craig asks, let's see some numbers. Let's see the actual number that is supposed to be coming in from the federal government, the 334 billion of the LifeWorks number. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Tim?
Yeah, well, Rick's right. We want to see some numbers too.
Yeah.
Of course, we've seen our own numbers, right? Numerous think tanks and actuaries have provided their particular numbers, and the conclusion is that Alberta is owed, right, up to $334 billion. And that's an old number now, to be entirely honest. That's an outdated number because the size of the CPP's asset, or the CPPIB's asset, has increased from the time that Morneau Chappelle, or TELUS, whatever it's called, LifeWorks, conducted their study. So if we take the $334 billion assessment to be accurate, back then it should be higher now, because the total amount in the asset fund has jumped from, I think it was about $575-ish billion from when Morneau Chappelle conducted their assessment to now, which it's what, $630 some billion?
632. This number is brand new within the last couple of days anyways. And this is from the cppinvestments.com. And so you can go and check it out if you want, anybody that's watching.
Right. So it's larger than it was. And so we're eagerly awaiting the federal government to release their number. I have no doubt they're hoping their hardest. The federal government is hoping their hardest to just let this this adventure die. They just want it to die quietly and forget about it. Hush, hush. But as Albertans, we have an obligation, and the government has an obligation too. The Alberta government has an obligation to make sure it doesn't go quietly. On the contrary, we have to remain strong and put pressure on the government to produce for us their numbers that they promised to give us in the fall. So we're waiting.
That's right. And that's what I was going to ask you is, have you heard anything about when we're getting the number other than the fall?
The fall. And the fall's a big time frame. Sean Newman did a podcast with Danielle Smith talking about this, and he was discussing the problem of generalized dates, where he says, a politician will say one thing, or they'll promise one thing, and they'll say it's coming in the spring. And Sean goes, when exactly is the spring? There's a lot of months that count for the spring.
That's right.
And the same is true here. When exactly is the fall, right? It feels like fall right now. The leaves are turning here in Alberta. So the fall has to be imminent, if not immediate. So we are waiting. All we know is that it's sometime in fall is what they say.
Yeah.
But I don't, believe it or not, I don't have much trust in government to keep their word. So we'll see.
Yeah. So a couple of other questions about where the CPP are investing the money. And this one here is Daniel Chadwick. She says, if it shows up on here, there it is. The Canada Pension Plan Investment Board recently disclosed 604 million in shares in Chinese EVs, electric vehicles. Oh my God. So the one thing I did want to mention is that if it's currently out in Ottawa, it's through the CPPIB, we really don't have much control over where any of that is going. We really, we can probably lobby, we can probably yell at the top of our lungs, send really bad worded letters to our MPs and say, I'm really concerned about where this money is going. But essentially, they're going to invest it wherever it makes sense to be making money. And if it does seem to be making money in the Chinese EV fund, if you want to call it that, then that would make sense. And even if it was brought back to Alberta, I'm thinking that if that's where the money was being made, that's probably where it would be invested. But if it's here in Alberta, we may be able to say to our investment board, wait a minute, you know what? We don't agree with a bunch of different things. Maybe we don't agree with climate emergency stuff. Maybe we don't agree with diversity, equity, inclusivity, and all that. Like, we don't know, right? But we would be able to at least be able to put that on either our government or the officials that would be elected somehow through the Alberta Pension Plan Investment Board.
That's quite right. Yeah, no, that's quite right. The Canadian Pension Plan Investing Board now officially has the mandate to, as you mentioned, earn as much money as possible, and that's their mandate.
Yeah.
But when you look at their reports, their board reports, it's clear they aren't necessarily following that mandate very closely. Oh, sure, they're making profit, or at least officially, publicly they are, if we're to believe the numbers.
Yeah.
But you read their board and governance, or their governance reports, And you see that they're actively pursuing policies of, like you mentioned, the diversity, equity, inclusion, decarbonized future. They're investing in low carbon projects and so on, and they intend to increase the size of their portfolio in those markets in the coming years. Now, they defend their position by saying, well, this is in the interests of the market. That is, we think we have, in order to remain competitive, if we want to keep making money, we're going to have to involve ourselves in these projects. I don't buy that argument. I don't think that's true. I think that's nonsense. I think on their own, so many of those renewable projects fail because they're not profitable, that I think it's a nonsensical argument. But nevertheless, it's the one that the CPPIB makes. And you're right, as it stands today, we don't have much control over, or any control actually, over what they invest in. Whereas if you had an Alberta pension plan, I'd simply say, make us money. That's it. Make us money. Do not pursue diversity, equity, inclusionary policies. Don't pursue social programs. Don't pursue some sort of activism. Just make me money and make a lot of it.
Yeah, that's true too. And then, so there's a lot of these comments coming up here, and we're just gonna see if we can get through a few of them. I didn't realize it was when I was rehearsing this earlier offline, these comments came up really, really quick. But now that we're live, I think it just takes a little bit more to get out there. So excuse me. Hands off our CPP. That's a good one. Other comments like Mark Terrio is going to say in just 1 second is hell no, right? And then Terry Bronner has good words to say about this. Keep the CPP forever. And I'm just going to do one more. I think we have an idea of what area or what we're going to be talking about in this next group of questions anyways. This one, Bill J. Hay says, leave my money alone, safe with the independent CPP, separate from weak politicians' whims. Hey, where did all the heritage funds go? Canada is one of a few countries with a separate and paid for pension. Leave it be. Do you want to make any comments?
These are a good string of comments. So the sentiment is, leave my CPP where it's at. Yeah. Leave it where it is. And the answer is, well, fine. If you want a less than mediocre pension, which pays you very little for all of the years of your contributions, and which is right now involved in social activism all around, not only the country, but the entire world, then fine, so be it. But it's not independent. You can't say that. Not when the prime minister or the finance minister is the one who appoints the members at the CPPIB. You can't say it's independent when Mark Carney, right, who has just been appointed the financial czar of the Liberal government, and who also sits as chair at Brookfield, Brookfield Investments, right? They're an investment firm, is this is in the Financial Post. He is right now lobbying government to give his firm $10 billion, and he's lobbying for an additional $36 billion from Canada's largest pension plans, which obviously include the CPP and the QPP, to start up his own separate investment fund that focuses on investing in infrastructure and so on in Canadian markets. So how can we call the CPP and so on, there it is, the CPP and so on, independent when we read about things like this? It's not independent, not at all. On the contrary, there is political interference right now. There's political interference in the appointment process. Apparently, there's going to be more political interference in what the CPP invests in, right? Carney is lobbying hard, and so on. There is, on the record, Justin Trudeau and Chrystia Freeland meeting with the pension bosses at the CPP saying, we want you to invest in Canadian infrastructure. Now, to the CPP's credit, they said, no, actually, we're going to stay where we are right now. But the point remains that government is trying to be, at the very least, actively involved in the Canadian pension plan process. So to call it independent is incorrect. That isn't factual. And as for the Heritage Fund, now we actually agree here with this final comment. We're quite right. We don't want politicians managing our money. On the contrary, we don't want that at all. We want the exact opposite. We want to keep politicians as far away as possible from the pension so that they're not able to interfere with it as their self-interested political aims dictate. So with the Heritage Fund, that's supposed to be it's supposed to be a big trust, right? That's only used in times of emergency, right? That's its principle. But of course, every premier and every cabinet has a different idea of what constitutes an emergency. And usually an emergency for them constitutes the possibility of losing political power. So that right there is the issue with introducing government into the equation with pensions and investing. What we're advocating for instead is an entirely separate pension plan, which has far better returns, as has been detailed explicitly by numerous economists and papers, than what we have with the CPP right now, and increases the quality of life for all Albertans. I don't see how one can argue against that. I think the benefits are obvious. I think they are ready to be captured, and we have an obligation to do so, to increase the quality of life our seniors enjoy, our middle-aged Albertans are soon to enjoy, and our younger Albertans will eventually enjoy.
Yeah, no, I agree. This next comment is really long, but we're going to try and read through this. So Mitch Sylvester, who was supposed to be on tonight, and one of the reasons why we were doing this earlier was because he's doing an event up in Grand Prairie. And with that event up in Grand Prairie, it starts at 7. So we thought maybe he'd be able to jump on here but he's busy. He's a busy guy. So this comment is actually from, I wasn't even sure if I'd get all this. Maybe I won't. This is from the last Grand Prairie event that we would have done. And I think that would have been probably in April or May. So Andrew Willman says, I went to the Grand Prairie event. Biggest takeaway is CPP isn't meeting my needs. CPP isn't governed as well as it could be. CPP's future is in doubt, etc. But instead of fixing the CPP, only fix APP. In other words, make sure that forget what's happening out there, just bring it into Alberta. To do that would require the huge percentage taken from the CPP and hope that they'll just administer it for the APP, because the portability for those who've worked in more provinces than just Alberta will be tough or expensive without them. And then I think I'll read the rest of this off of here. That the only way to make good on Tanner's promises, because obviously you made some comments up there, is to screw Canadian seniors whose pensions are primarily or entirely from working in Canada, but not Alberta. That would be weird, to retire back home and move next to a Canadian and then notice how different your pensions are because Alberta pulled that huge percentage out and the room was okay with that. I'm not okay with that. Just fix the CPP so all Canadians can retire in dignity.
Right. Okay, so we can...
It's a good comment. Yes.
Yeah, it's a good comment. Well, let's see if we can disassemble it here one by one. I'm going to take a look here at my computer just so I can read the comment. So the biggest takeaway is CPP isn't meeting needs. CPP isn't governed as well as it could be, and its future is in doubt, and so on. So the big takeaway from our presentation, or at least in particular my presentation, is the CPP does not provide the adequate returns that our politicians make it seem like it does. Right? We're basically told the CPP is this juggernaut retirement plan that keeps all Canadians' heads above water when they retire. And that's nonsense. That isn't true. And all you have to do is look at the mathematics to see why it's not true. Right? The average rate of return as a percentage for the average Canadian pensioner right now on their CPP contributions is about 2.5 or 3%. It's not massive. Right? If you had put that money into a mutual fund and let a mutual fund advisor do with it what he or she pleased over 20, 30, 40 years, you would be in a far better position financially than what you would be if it that you are now, because you had to put that money into the CPP. So that's the main takeaway. Yeah. Then he says, instead of fixing CPP, the only fix is APP. Well, the truth is you can't fix the CPP in this way because the fix means changing demographics so radically that you would have to, well, you couldn't do it. You'd have to basically destroy the country, right? The reason the CPP generates the meek and weak returns that it does for all Canadians is because of the demographic of Canada. In large part, that's just the way things work. And because Albertans in particular are seeing proportionally far lower returns than others when you consider how much we put into the CPP, is because we're a wealthier province than others. We're a wealthier province, we're a younger province on the average, and we work more. than other provinces on average. And so we pay a lot of money into the CPP. And while it's true we also do get more back as a percentage, we're still not doing as well as we could be, right? Because the actual CPP itself, the huge machine of the CPP, has to meet all needs from BC all the way to the East Coast with Nova Scotia and Newfoundland and so on and so on. So you can't just up and fix the CPP, right? To do so would be to completely alter the demographic of Canada, which is entirely impossible. You would also have to remove the political appointment process with the Canadian Pension Plan Investing Board, which it's like, good luck, right? Good luck with that. You would have to do so many calculations and so much tinkering, so much fixing, that when all was said and done, you would find yourself in a position that was nowhere near as desirable as what it would be to simply just up and start your own pension plan, which again is legal and is constitutional. Then he says we have to hope that they'll just administer it. No, we never said that. That isn't quite correct. The last thing we're going to do is put our hope in government. We're not just going to hope they administer it. First of all, under the Canadian Pension Plan Act, government they can't just maybe give you the pension, right? They have a legal responsibility to give you the pension. So if Alberta wants to leave the Canadian Pension Plan, it cannot legally say, well, we're not going to start one. You put our hope in us and too bad. No, it doesn't work like that. Instead, Alberta must start their own pension plan. They must have their own Alberta pension plan if they're going to leave the Canadian Pension Plan. And if they don't do so, then we're not allowed to leave the Canadian Pension Plan. So it isn't just a hope and prayer. No, this is a legal requirement. It's a legal responsibility the government has to follow. Then he says, hope that they'll just administer it for the APP because the portability for those who have worked in more provinces than just Alberta will be tough or expensive without them. I don't quite understand that comment. But if the gentleman is saying that the cost to the CPP when Alberta leaves the Canadian Pension Plan will be terrible for all Canadians, you have to be careful. You have to provide your numbers. Firstly, Trevor Toombs provided his, and he says even if Alberta takes its full amount, it's $334 billion from the Canadian Pension Plan, which again, it is owed. This isn't stealing. This is what we're owed as a consequence of us contributing and disproportionately contributing to the CPP for all those years. If we do so, Canadian Pension Plan or Canadian pensioners, or actually more accurately, workers, will only see their Canadian Pension Plan contribution rates increase by about 1% because there's already a spring built into the CPP's contribution rates right now that is meant to absorb shocks should they happen. So you can't quite say that. And then he says, that the only way to make good on Tanner's promise is, I never make a promise on behalf of government. No, you can't say it's a promise. On the contrary, this is what should happen. We're not going to promise that. No one said we're going to work hard to make sure it happens, but to promise it is foolish, right? That the scripture is clear. What's the next part of that comment, Kerry?
Is to screw Canadian seniors whose pensions are primarily or entirely from working in Canada, but not Alberta.
Right.
So in other words,
go ahead.
If we take that money back to Alberta, people who have Alberta workers, really, right? We bring that back. It's still this fund, and again, we've talked about this. I can't see my face on here. We've talked about this before. That it's really a pay-as-you-go system, right? So if we ended up bringing back $300 billion into this, it's not like we would not have to we don't have to pay into this forever. We'll just whittle away down at that because no, that's not the idea. Is that we want to be able to have this and carry it forward for generations, really, right? Yeah. So that's what I would expect that we'd be able to do. Otherwise, in theory, we could start right now.
Yeah.
Right. If we over contribute right now of $3 billion, we basically contribute $9 billion, but we're really only receiving back $6 billion each year in benefits to our pensioners.
Right.
We are over contributing $3 billion each year.
Right. Yeah, that disproportionate contribution. Yes. But
so we could start right now, and maybe we should.
Right. No, and see, even to his comment, the idea that the only way to start this is to screw over other Canadians is total nonsense. We are not decreasing the size of seniors' pensions now, right? Suppose you had your own Alberta pension plan. And suppose that before we left the Canadian Pension Plan, a senior in Ontario was earning $1,000 every month in CPP. Well, after Alberta leaves, that senior in Ontario is still going to be earning $1,000. So the idea that we're somehow screwing the rest of Canada because we would dare start our own pension, which is more which has a higher benefit for Albertans, is total nonsense. It would be like saying, well, my neighbor put in more money to his house than what I did, and so now he lives in a nicer house. I got screwed. No, you didn't. That is such nonsense, right? Again, this is it's an attack that doesn't work at all. So, far from painting it's a good comment, but far from painting an accurate picture of what we're proposing or what would happen in Canada, I think the gentleman's comment does the opposite. He isn't quite correct in his assumptions. He's not correct in his assertions, and the logic isn't quite right there.
And, again, in his defense, I wasn't at that particular meeting, but if it was done in March, April, May, we have learned and talked about so much more since then.
Yeah.
Right. And I think maybe he's already answered his question.
Yeah.
Of course, I haven't been able to go back and ask, but I'm just thinking that because even one of his last comments, just fix the CPP so all Canadians can retire in dignity.
Right.
I think you, right off the top, you kind of mentioned exactly, well, it's impossible to fix unless we go through a lot of things to make it fix. And the rule right now would be, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, if we decided to do an Alberta pension plan today, we would have 3 years in order to get everything worked out.
That's
so
right.
That then on the next day, let's say it's April or September 20th of 2027, right? I guess technically that would be it.
Yeah.
Then if you get a pension check that day, there's no skipping. You wouldn't even know, other than it's saying from CPP 1 month and now says APP the next month. That would be it.
That's exactly right. A 3-year process has to be instituted once you declare your intention to leave the Canadian Pension Plan to make sure you have the necessary infrastructure constructed. And that way, like you mentioned, when the switch does happen 3 years down the road, it's seamless. From one check to the other, all else equal, nothing changes except the name at the top of it.
That's right. Exactly. And it's amazing how many, just in that conversation, how many comments and questions we answered based on that. So I'm glad we're having this discussion. So Afterburner 868 says, I would like more information on how much Alberta would receive from CPP. If a person who worked in the province, but they left the province, who would be responsible to pay the pension portion for the years they were working in Alberta? Does the money follow them? If I'm deferring my CPP, what will I get from an Alberta pension fund? So those are actually kind of like 2 or 3 types of questions.
Yeah. It's a good question. I think that he or she almost answered the question in the question, where basically the money follows the individual. Yep. So, let's suppose that you have your own, we start our own Alberta pension plan. Basically, the way it works is the Canadian pension plan would simply say, okay, John Doe has accumulated a certain amount of asset over the years. That is, he has paid a certain amount of money into the Canadian pension plan, and he is owed a certain amount of money when he retires. And so we as the CPP are just going to transfer what John Doe has paid into the CPP plus what we have to owe him when he retires to the APP, right? You transfer the assets and the liabilities of the particular individual from the CPP to the APP. It's really just like switching banks. That's all. You take your money, it's in bank A, you move it to bank B. Nothing else changes except the name at the top of the screen when you log into your bank account, right? You still owe the bank the same amount of money. The bank still owes you the same amount of money, what you have holding in the bank, and everything else stays equal. Now, what if you are working in Alberta and Alberta has its own pension plan, and then you leave Alberta to work in, let's say, Saskatchewan for 5 years, and then come back to Alberta? What of that situation? Well, the rules in the Canadian Pension Plan Act state that you are considered an employee of whatever province your employer resides in. So if your employer does business out of Alberta, then you are considered an Alberta worker, even if you have to go to BC for a bit to, say, work on the pipeline or something. Yeah. So long as your employer, who pays you to do so, is out of Alberta, then you are considered an Alberta employee. So as long as you're working for an Alberta employer, you are paying into, in this case, it would be the Alberta Pension Plan. Great. That's easy. Now, let's suppose you decide to work for a Saskatchewan employer for 5 or 10 years. What then? Well, you would start paying into the Canadian pension plan, right? Because your Saskatchewan employer obviously is situated in Saskatchewan and therefore is not partaking in the Alberta pension plan. And so you'd be contributing to the CPP. And then suppose you move back. Now you're back in Alberta. Well, once again, you're contributing to the APP. And at the end of everything, when you decide to retire, you will have, in essence, two pension plans, right? You'll have the Canadian pension plan you paid into, even if it's just for 5 or 10 years, and you will have the Alberta pension plan that you paid into. Now, either you'll simply receive 2 checks in retirement, one from your CPP and one from your APP, or either of the pension plans will just transfer, right, their asset and liability that you've accrued to one or the other, and you'll just receive one pension check.
That's right. Yes.
With both amounts combined. I think, to be honest, I think the first is easier than the second. I think the first way of doing so, having 2 separate checks, is easier, and so I'd be in favor of that. But nevertheless, the money would stay the same. It's a good question.
Yeah, and likewise, I mean, technically, we could have 3 pension plans within the next few years. We'd have an Alberta pension plan, a Canada pension plan, and a Quebec pension plan.
Yeah, that's
so
true.
If you ended up working in Montreal or somewhere around there, you'd be putting that money into there as well. So, yeah, very good question. There's a lot of people that were the what ifs. I'd like to know if there is anybody out there that's watching that maybe does have 3 different provinces that they were working in or something like that. I grew up in Manitoba, and of course I have part of the well, it's all the CPP. It wouldn't matter because even as it is working here right now as an Alberta pension plan, that's where my money would be going. So yeah, as I say that out loud, now here's a question, and I'm just I'm hoping I can phrase this properly. So here I am working for 20 years in Manitoba. I end up working 20 years in Alberta. And of course, if you look at my CPP, I've got a certain amount supposed to be coming to me.
Yeah.
That amount of money now is, we say, you know what, we're going to roll everything over into an APP. Do they look at where I live, or do they look at my last taxes, or how do they figure out that I'm actually in Alberta?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. So just how do you figure that you're in Alberta is simply, file taxes and so on. You file in your home province. Absolutely. And then you can go farther and say, once the APP is started, everything's cooking. It's easy, right? If you contribute to the APP, you get APP benefits. But the first few years are a bit trickier, right? And so I think what you do, and this seems to me to be the closest way to interpret the Robarts section with the pension and so on, is you say, okay, we start an Alberta pension plan, and if you decide to increase benefits for seniors right off the start, then what you do is you say, which seniors worked in Alberta, for a certain period of time. Let's say you worked in Alberta for 20 or 30 years. Well, if we had an Alberta pension plan during that time, you would have been contributing to an Alberta pension plan during that time. Yeah. And so we're going to say that even though classically you contributed to the CPP, right, over 30 years, whatever it might be, we're acting as if you would have contributed to an APP had it have existed, because that's what you would have done. And therefore you will receive the Alberta pension plan benefit. That way we wouldn't see the problem of Alberta decides to start its own pension plan. It announces increased benefits for seniors, and all of a sudden we see a big migration into Alberta for people who've never worked here and who've lived, all over the country, all over their life, wanting the increased benefit. We couldn't have that, right? No, that wouldn't be right. What you can say is, if you worked in Alberta and, in your life, and therefore you would have been paying into an Alberta pension, had there have been one there, you will now receive benefits as though there were an Alberta pension plan, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think that does make perfect sense, I think. And then a couple of questions like this, and these are good. So Crash Socratica asks, when will we be going to go door to door? I haven't been on summer holidays this year, and we are taking a long one. So the question is not only about door to door, because people were also asking, why do we need volunteers? What are we actually going to be doing? Well, the thing is, we actually need an army of volunteers. So there's 2 parts to this. Number 1 is just getting out and collecting the contact names. How do we do that? Well, the webinars. We're posting stuff on social media. We are getting out to meetings. Like I said, there's a Grand Prairie meeting tonight. I'm just going to quickly, if you haven't been on the website in a little while, we do have an event schedule. And they do list off anything that we're kind of involved with here. So there's Grand Prairie. Next Friday, we have Lacombe. The week after that, there's something else in Bonnyville. So you can always go and take a look at these to find out where we are. And that is basically just to collect the people that signatures for, or pardon me, just the contact names. Once we get the now 300,000 that we need, that's when the real work will begin, because we have to have 90, all the 300,000 signatures, wet signatures, have to be collected within 90 days. And so that's where we're really going to need a team of people. So if you're organized and you want to be involved, if you look at it in terms of constituency associations, just because that's an easy way for us to do a map through Elections Alberta, there's 87 constituencies. Divide that by the 300,000 people that we need. I think every constituency needs, what's the math on that? 4,000, 40,000, something like that. It's a big number anyways, right? So we need those number of signatures. So what we would end up doing is we'd have a lead in each one of those positions or each one of those constituencies. They would have a team of people, and maybe that team will only be a few people. It could be dozens. It could be hundreds of people. They would go out and they would do the door knocking. Maybe they set up a table at the community center, whatever way we can possibly get people's actual signatures for this. Now, obviously, if we have 300,000 people, those are raring to go. And once we start with those 300,000 contact names, I know that's going to balloon, because we're getting those 300,000 names. We know where you live, figuratively and literally. We will be able to say we're going to come either knock on your door, or we'll be at a community center near you, we'll be at a mall near you, something to that effect. Come and meet us and make sure that you sign it. And people will be going, well, wait a minute, what are they signing? I didn't know anything about this. I'm going to sign up as well. So that 300,000 will quickly balloon past 400,000, I know for a fact, which is great because we always do need a buffer. So again, the question is door to door, but I'm thinking it's more about what we will be doing as volunteers. And of course, even if you don't want to necessarily sign up for a volunteer, you time constraint, you're not really sure what you want to do, just get involved somehow. Even just send us a message at info@albertafirstpension.ca. I'm going to put that back up on here again. Send us a message. Just say how you can possibly get involved and when you can possibly get involved. And maybe you're away in Greece for the entire month of November. Hey, no problem. That's okay. We'll figure this out if we can get the numbers in by then. So I think that's all I wanted to say about that. And then a lot of questions about let's see, government and influence and all that. And I'm just gonna maybe I know we've talked about this a little bit, Tanner, but maybe just kind of go into a bit of a ramble about, is there a way that we can prevent government from being basically involved in any of this?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that's the central question.
Yeah.
And the answer is, well, first you have to become involved. We can't just sit on our chairs and hope government doesn't intervene into the pension markets, because we know that they would if they had the opportunity to.
Yeah.
And we know that for them, the opportunity to do so simply means an apathetic population. If people allow them to plunge their hands into every market, then they will do so. Right? They will not waste any time in guiding their healing touch into all of the markets to make the economy so much better than what it is. Right. So we have to be involved. That's the first point. The second point is, of course, the actual Alberta Pension Plan Investing Board, or at least whatever system we use for our investments, has to be totally removed from government. I think the most effective way to do so, I'm quite convinced that the most effective way to remove government influence from the pension investments is to say at the end of every year, okay, we have, let's say, $2 billion left over after we've taken in all our pension money and sent it all out. We got $2 billion left. We're going to take that $2 billion and we're going to divvy it amongst 5 different investing firms, right? And let's suppose you got 500. Is that 500? Yeah, 400 billion. 4 billion. $2 billion left over, $400 million per investing firm, let's say. So you say we got $2 billion total. We're going to give 5 investing firms $400 million each. And they're going to take that money and they're going to invest it on Albertans' behalf. And we're going to give those private investing managers a target. We say you have to earn a 7 or 10% rate of returns over 5 years or something, whatever it is. Yep. And if you don't, we're going to pull our money and we're going to put it somewhere else. So you have 5 years to prove yourself. Yep. And if 1 or 2 of those managers does very poorly, then the other 3 will balance it out, right? It's a diversification. It mitigates risk using the strategy. And we know that government won't be involved, or at least will have much less incentive to be involved in these investing firms, primarily because the investing firms won't want it. Instead, they're going to want to make money, because if they make money, they keep the big contract. And if they keep the big contract, they themselves take home a bigger paycheck. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the most effective way to keep government out of the pension process, right? We have to be active, and we also have to basically move the money as far away from government as possible. We, of course, might want to instead have our own Alberta Pension Plan investing board. If that's the case, then we can't have government members appoint the investing board. They have to be a totally independent board that operates separate from cabinet and from bureaucracy. And so you would appoint those board members in a different way, whether it be like a job interview simply on the grounds of competency or what. There are a few different options to do so. But the question is well taken. Government can't be involved in this process, not at all, or at least not in the plan. They're going to, by nature, be involved in the process, right? An Alberta pension plan would be just as bureaucratic in that regard as a Canadian pension plan, but they couldn't be involved in the investing process. That they have to be totally separate.
That's right. Yeah. And you know, if that investment board's in Edmonton, it's a lot easier to go knock on that door than it would be to drive out to Ottawa. So
yeah.
That's kind of what I say all the time. And I mean, there are different ways that you could get a hold of them and make your voice known. But that to me is, if it's closer to home, it's all better for me.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Here's another kind of series of these. They're all, so we've been a little bit talking about genuine questions. We've been talking about the hell no, don't do this, hands off my CPP. But what I do want to end up with, we've got about 10 more minutes, is the amount of praise that we've had for being able to do what we're doing and getting out to these meetings and doing these webinars. So Serpent Slayer says, great efforts all, let's do this. With that said, please don't let your guard down regarding Smith and the UCP. I'm not an NDP or Liberal voter. At the end of the day, Smith and the UCP are just politicians as well. Use cautious optimism regarding her promises, and hopefully she and the UCP are indeed totally behind us on this. Fingers crossed, and God bless. So,
good comment. We agree 100%. It doesn't matter what flag the politician flies. We don't want the politician controlling this pension, right? We don't want, it doesn't matter if it's conservative, NDP, Liberal, Wild Rose, TIP, anything. It doesn't matter, right? The principle remains. No matter who's in power, they can't be controlling the investing process with the Alberta pension. Impossible.
Yeah. And again, lots of other comments. Claire McCarchuk, so good to hear the pros and cons of an Alberta pension plan. And there are lots of those, and I know it just seems to take forever for me to post this. I'll just post 1 or 2 more extra ones. But I, you know, the thing that I'm really excited about is once you have these conversations with people and they realize what the benefits are, most people are like, well, why have we not done this?
Yeah.
Like, why is it taking so long? We should just be able to do this. And I mentioned this, that every province should be able to do this. And it's just that we're now the ones that are stepping up and actually doing it. And lots, and even I'll finish these last couple of ones just with these sorts of comments as well. Benny McNutt, Alberta needs this Alberta pension plan. We need to get away from those criminals in Ottawa. I don't know if they're all criminals, but They all seem to be in that sort of scenario.
It's true.
Let's do one or two more different ones here. Just
a pension plan does give you a lot more autonomy. That is interesting. Yes, it's an interesting comment. It certainly does.
Lawrence Morrow, safer in Ottawa or safer in Alberta than in Ottawa.
And, here's what I've never understood about the progressive argument with if you have an Alberta pension plan, there's a danger that government's going to touch it. Well, there's a danger now that the government's going to touch it. Like, they so often neglect the fact that the CPP is often defined as the very thing they're trying to stand against. It's curious.
Yeah.
So when the gentleman says safer in Alberta and Ottawa, he's actually correct, because it's easier to hold our politicians accountable here at home than it is to hold them accountable when they're 3,000 kilometers away.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and that's kind of it for the comments. There's lots of praise going through the social media comments. I don't know how many I've kind of gone through that have actually been posted. Definitely thousands, maybe even definitely the high hundreds, like 1,800, 2,000, 2,200 across all platforms. That's a large number, and the majority of people are with us. They're definitely, they want this to happen, and they're excited about it. And we do get emails from people that will say, I'm all for it. Unfortunately, I can't do this because I'm ill, or I don't have the time to do it. That's okay. You can all be our ambassadors. You can all just spread the word however you possibly can. And like I said earlier, was at the Thanksgiving table, make sure that you bring up the Alberta Pension Plan if you can. Rock some boats. I know it's one of those topics. Nobody likes talking politics and religion, right?
That's true. It's true.
And yet we should absolutely.
You have some adequate Thanksgiving conversation topics.
I can't wait to Thanksgiving.
No, I agree.
I think I'm just going to have a Thanksgiving dinner just for the sake of having people over and talking politics.
Absolutely. What a time. Make sure the knives are away.
Yeah. So maybe let's wrap up with one more quick thing. So Tanner, you've been at a number of these events. We actually just did one. Was it only last Thursday?
Last Thursday. Last Thursday.
Yeah, we did one in Calgary. And again, you're going to be in Lacombe next week, and probably Bonnyville after that, because it's close to home. What are some of the comments that you've had people come up and ask you?
Oh, that's a good question. The response firstly has been very positive. The questions, I would say mostly, and rightfully so, have been focused on keeping government out of the pension process.
Yeah,
and I sympathize with with those questions, because they are serious ones, and those are ones which, if we get wrong, could prove devastating for the pension. If government is allowed to operate it, which again they wouldn't be. We're working as hard as we can to make sure they wouldn't be.
That's right.
Then it would be an undesirable pension, and we, far from advocating for it, we'd be advocating against it. So that is, I would say, is probably the most prominent question. What about government? How to keep government out? And the honest answer is we just have to be so involved. We have to be so involved. As exciting as it might be sometimes, as boring as it truly is, we have to be involved.
Yeah. One of the other questions that I get a lot is, why do we have to do a referendum?
Right? And that's actually you might even answer that better than I. Certainly, that's really a question for Smith and for the UCP.
Exactly.
Legally, they don't have to, but they've decided to. Whether that be to introduce a lot of democratic weight behind their movement to start an own Alberta pension plan, or whether it be because they're not certain of the temperature of an Alberta pension plan, or whether they just thought maybe haphazardly about announcing the intention to have a referendum and now realize they're bound to that promise. I don't know. I don't talk with Danielle or with the rest of the caucus.
Well, so I'll text her right now. No, I'm kidding. But I've been to a few town halls, and she is still going around the province, at least until the United Conservative Party AGM, the annual general meeting on November 1st and 2nd. And most of the times when pension is brought up, she kind of says it this way. She's from the polling that they've done, A third like the idea of a pension, an Alberta pension plan. A third do not like it, and a third are indifferent. So if you know anybody that's indifferent and you want to kind of tell them the pros and if there are any cons of all this, definitely tell them the pros, then that would be enough probably to sway that we would have enough momentum in order to do this. And then from there on in, I mean, there's lots of things we can talk about, but essentially we just want to deal with pension right now because, like I said right at the beginning of this episode, it is the one that is nonpartisan, it's non-religion, it's not based on your color. It's all to do with the money and the money that we all need when we retire and we need as a pension. So I think that's kind of all that she would end up saying is that they're still waiting on that. They'll wait for the number to come back from the feds this fall. And when that does come back, maybe we'll be able to do a really long episode just on what that actual number means. So I'm kind of excited about that when it does, because no matter what, even if they came back and they said, you know what, after doing all our financial bean counting, we're looking at 100 billion. Then we can say, well, wait a minute, does that make sense? Should we tie up the courts with this, or should we just take the money and run the assets and run, or that sort of conversation? Because I think no matter what, like we've talked about before, if we over contribute every year anyways, we could start this from scratch. But it would be nice to be able to have that nest egg that we're owed anyways.
Yes, so, absolutely. I completely agree.
So with that, I will wish you a great evening, Tanner. You're off to work. I've got some stuff to get done. And it was an early day. We're going to do it every second Tuesday at 5 o'clock. We're going to change that. And if you can, join us. And if not, by all means, don't forget to watch the episodes after. And if you do have questions after, by all means, put them in and we'll compile them and try and answer them as best as we can. So again, thank you so much for coming out, Tanner. And thank you so much for everybody watching. And we will see you guys in a couple of Tuesdays. I'm not going to do the math on it. You guys do the math.
Thanks a bunch.
That's your math to do. All right, everybody. Have a good night.